dive into it, but there's one thing that I want to show you first. If you look at Judges chapter 2 and verse 19, this is just going to be one of those things. I'm not sure. I already started talking about it, but I'm not sure that I can just say it. I think that it's something that you're just going to have to see as we go through the book. But I'll tell you what's happening first. In chapter 2 and verse 19, whenever the judge died, they turned back and were more corrupt than their fathers. So this is not a cycle, a two-dimensional cycle like this. Every time this happens, they get worse. They were more corrupt. And so it becomes not a cycle, two-dimensional cycle, but a three-dimensional spiral. And so they became more corrupt than their fathers, going after other gods and serving and bowing down to them. They did not drop any of the practices or their stubborn ways. And so they just keep adding and adding and adding and getting worse and worse and worse. And this is something that I have seen pretty recently here. Just to give credit where credit is due. There's a preacher named Philip Martin who's, ever since COVID started, he's been doing a lot of stuff online. And Philip Martin and Jared Saltz were just having a conversation about Judges, and a friend of theirs, Maria Hagwood, made this up for them. And I've tried to do hand-drawn things, but this one is like professional level, and it's exactly what it needs to be. And so this is what we'll see with Judges, this downward spiral. And it even, if you pay attention to the colors, it even matches that chiastic form that we talked about last time. The white prologue goes with the white epilogue. Othniel goes with Samson. Ehud and Shamgar go with Jephthah. And so you've got this, it's a toilet bowl. And it's getting worse and worse and worse, and it's going to end in the sewer. So tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to see, it took me a while. Like when I read through Judges chapter 1, I don't just naturally see this. But when you start paying attention to the words, what you see in Judges chapter 1 is basically a table of contents for the downward spiral. And so we'll be reading it, and we'll talk about, at each level, we'll talk about what's happening, how's it getting worse, what's the problem, and what does this indicate for us in our own lives as we see these things. That's the goal in some of this. So, anything you want to say before we start reading? Yeah, Lisa?
Beginning of Judges is it was made clear by Joshua before he left the earth, specific things, don't associate with those people, do what I tell you, don't get caught up in their gods and other things. And it's really no different for us, even though we don't have a Joshua that addresses all of us in the world. But it's so heartbreaking to me that even though it's real easy to see how bad this is and how foolish they've been, that it's easy to not pay attention or hold it in your mind or to a lot of his instructions.
Yeah, and what you're saying is, so Joshua said do this and showed them this and told them this. And then they did everything that he said not to do. Everything. He did, and more. And what Judges is going to be excellent for us is to say, what happens for Ryan when I do that? That's what's good for what we're doing in this. So good direction there, Lisa, with that. Okay, listen, I'm going to do a wild disclaimer here. Careful, I just want you to know what you're getting into whenever you volunteer to read for Judges. There's going to be city names and place names, and if you just want to say, I don't know what that says, and keep on rolling, fine. But do the best that you can. But can somebody please read Judges 1 verses 1 through 18, please? Oh, can I tell you this too? I think before you read, this is where we want to be. This is the top. We're good. This is an ideal situation. So as we read these 18 verses, whoever's going to read it for us, my question after we read is going to be, what does the top look like? What do we want? Like, what are we looking for here that Ryan needs to be focusing on, that Ellisville needs to be focusing on? Okay, sorry for the interruption. 1 through 18, please.
Now it came about after the death of Joshua that the sons of Israel inquired of the Lord, saying, who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? The Lord said, Judah shall go up. Behold, I have given the land into his hand. Then Judah said to Simeon his brother, come up with me into the territory allotted me, that we may fight against the Canaanites. And I in turn will go with you into the territory allotted me. So Simeon went with him. Judah went up, and the Lord gave the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hands. And they defeated 10,000 men at Bezek. They found Adonai-Bezek in Bezek and fought against him. And they defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. But Adonai-Bezek fled, and they pursued him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and big toes. Adonai-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and their big toes cut off used to gather up scraps under my table, as I have done. So God has repaid me. So they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. Then the sons of Judah fought against Jerusalem and captured it and struck it with the edge of the sword, and set the city on fire. Afterward, the sons of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites, living in the hill country and in the Negev in the lowland. So Judah went against the Canaanites who lived in Hebron. Now the name of Hebron formerly was Kiriath Arba, and they struck Sheshaiah and Ahimah and Talmai. And from there, he went against the inhabitants of Debir. Now the name of Debir formerly was Kiriath Sefer. And Caleb said, the one who attacks Kiriath Sefer and captures it, I will even give him my daughter, Achshah, for my wife. Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, captured him. So he gave him his daughter, Achshah, for a wife. Then it came about, when she came to him, that she persuaded him to ask her father for a field. Then she alighted from her donkey, and Caleb said to her, what do you want? She said to him, give me a blessing, since you have given me the land of the Negev. Give me also springs of water. So Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. The descendants of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up from the city of palms with the sons of Judah to the wilderness of Judah, which is in the south of Arad. And they went and lived with the people. Then Judah went with Simeon his brother, and they struck the Canaanites living in Zephath, and utterly destroyed it. So the name of the city was called Hormah. And Judah took Gaza and its territory, and Ashkelon with its territory, and Ekron with its territory.
How about, I guess let's leave verse 19. That's good. You did a good job with those names. Thanks, Luke, for that. What do you see that's good here? Did you have something, Jay?
Just from the very beginning, I see the comparison of David from the very, very beginning. The sons of Israel asked of the Lord.
Not only David, but we saw a lot of that in Joshua, didn't we?
Well, I wasn't up here for that, so.
Oh, yeah, you didn't see a lot of that in Joshua, but Ed showed us a lot of that in Joshua, yeah. We saw this in verse 1. The people of Israel inquired of the Lord. We had an entire Joshua class about people who acted the situation with the Gibeonites, was it Joshua chapter 8, who went and they didn't ask God what they were supposed to do, and they got themselves into a big hairy mess. And the whole theme was ask what God wants us to do. You don't just do stuff without asking God what it, and so here are a group of people who the book starts with, what does God want us to do? That's good. We want that. You can keep going and you can tell me the next thing that's right about this section of text, or you can talk about that point. because I want each one of these things to be practical. I think that one's pretty obvious. Before we act, we need to say, what's God's will? We don't just do what we want to do because we feel like doing it. We say, what has God specifically said, and what am I supposed to be doing right now to serve him? This is good. We praise this behavior. Next. Yeah, Sarah?
I was thinking, they didn't, well, the question that they asked kind of struck me when I read this recently, because they asked who will be the first to fight. And they asked that a couple other times in the book, and it seems like what the judges did for the people was they were the first to fight. They knew they had to go into these battles that they were timid about, and God was going to win the battles, but he needed someone to go first, and they didn't have Joshua anymore. And so I was just made me think of when Jesus rose up to heaven in Acts, and then now it's the disciples' turn to go first.
Yeah.
And doesn't mean that God isn't with them, but they have to go first. I was just thinking, for me, how often you're looking for someone to go first, and even thinking, Jesus will, I don't know, somehow prick someone's heart, and he'll kind of skirl on the side and help them along, but having that, I don't know, courage to go first is really kind of difficult, and it's one of their shortcomings.
Yeah.
But it's cool that you see God's still able to accomplish his promises.
Right.
Like that, but like just when you think you need to go first, and you don't look around for other people to be the first to do things.
That's a good catch. And look at this, too. This is the subtitle that I have for the class here, Failure of Male Leadership. What we're going to be seeing throughout Judges is a failure of leadership. And the book starts with, who's going to go first? And it's Judah, and they do it. This is good. They went first. They led. They did what they were supposed to do. That's good. Commendable. We want this behavior. Next. What do you see? Yeah, Ryan?
Verse 17, my translation says, they utterly destroyed it, meaning they're not leaving even the inhabitants to be slaves or to be servants like later in the book, or even further to intermarry with them. It's a completion of their takeover.
Yeah, and we saw some of that too, didn't we, in the book of Joshua, especially from the very start with Achan, when God said, utterly destroy, don't touch anything. And we saw an example of somebody who did not do that, and all of Israel suffered because of it. But here at the very start, with Judah doing what they're supposed to be doing, they do what they're told to do. It's not just, they're not just obeying, they're fully obeying, which is a huge thing that we should say about someone. Excellent point. See another one? Yep, Jesse?
I find it interesting that Judah and Simeon are working together.
Okay. Why do you think that's neat? Or notice it?
It was really Judah's responsibility to clear out their own section of land, and Simeon went out of the way to help. And that kind of creates this united front among the different tribes of
Yeah.
Israel, that they're working together and that they're both trying to do God's will.
That was a big thing in Joshua too, wasn't it? Was it, I don't know the chapter, I think that it's Numbers 32, where Moses told Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh who wanted to stay on the east side of the Jordan, yes, you can stay on the east side of the Jordan, but you have to come over and help us first to do this thing. And in the book of Joshua, at the very end of chapter 1, it started out with Joshua saying, are you all going to do what you're supposed to do? And then the book of Joshua ends, one of the last things that we see in the book of Joshua is all of these tribes saying, we helped you, we did what we were supposed to do. And so we've got a picture of leadership, we've got a picture of full obedience, we've got a picture of cooperation. I want you to remember that one especially. I'll start throwing some of these things up here. They asked what God's will was. I want you to really, if you have notes, if you're writing notes right now and you write cooperation, write over that one 3 times and bold it and circle it and stick a star next to it. Because throughout the book of Judges, one of the key signs of failure and decline is going to be a lack of cooperation. We're really going to see it when we get to Deborah. When we get to Deborah's story, we're going to see a failure to step up and do what you're supposed to do. And then from there, by the time we get to the end of the book, we've got civil war. Not only are we not working together and helping each other out, we're fighting against each other. So that point is going to be massive throughout the book. Got anything else, Dan?
From the start of the conquest, when they first crossed the Jordan in Jericho, to the book of Judges, and the end of the book of Joshua with the death of Joshua, how many years was that?
Yeah, well, that's the thing with this book. One of the things that we said in last Wednesday for the introduction, Joshua lived 110 years. And we know that 40 of those years was him wandering with Moses. You can pinpoint, and I don't know the exact number, how long Joshua lived. And we can pinpoint the start of Saul's reign as king. But here's what we can't do. You can't take all of the years in the book of Judges, and he had peace for 40 years, and he had peace for 40 years, and he had peace, and the oppressor, the Midianites, came and oppressed the people for 40 years. You're not able to put all of those things together. This is not a history book, is what I'm saying. This is a sermon that's been patchworked together to make a point.
Well, I understand that, but I was looking more for just like a general thing, because at least in my life, reading all the way through the first 2 chapters of Judges, I get that the people are just tired of war.
You did what?
I get that the people of Israel were just exhausted of war. They've been at it 20, 30, like 40 years, and they're just like, I want to go home. I'm done. That's what Joshua did. Like in his old age.
Yeah, I just don't, for example, when we start in Judges 1 in verse 8, the men of Judah fought against Jerusalem and captured it and struck it with the edge of the sword. And then when you get Jerusalem's also mentioned at the very end of Judges, and they don't have Jerusalem yet. It's not a chronological book. It's not a history book. It's saying, here are the stories that we can, historical stories that we can put together in a certain way in order to make this point. And so what I'm telling you is I don't know the answer to your question because that's not what Judges is for. Yeah, I mean, if you want like a ballpark, if you want a ballpark, this is, you could do that. You could say, Moses got the law in 1446. He wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. So what does that take us to? 1406, right? And Saul began to reign in 1050. So we've got 400 years to work with Judges. That make anywhere close to what you're doing?
Well, no, man. I was just like my own circumstances in my life. I know Judges is patched together and you can't do that, right? But Judges is like the continuation of like Joshua.
Yeah, Joshua. It definitely is after Joshua.
He died at 110 years old, and he retired in his old age with the land still unconquered.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, Joshua tells us that he didn't have the whole land, so we know that. That's not a surprise.
Going into the first 2 chapters where it says this tribe didn't drive them out, this tribe didn't drive them out, this tribe didn't drive them out, like etc.
Let's do this. Let's talk history and dates and details later. That way we can focus on the point of Joshua for class. We'll do that now, and then we can do that later as soon as we're done with class. So here's what we've got with Joshua. And I don't want to forget this piece also. The very last piece is going to be huge with the end of this book, and this is what I'm going to talk about. They went out and they did what they were supposed to do. This is full obedience, but look at like verses 9 and 10. Afterwards, the men of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites who lived in the hill country, in the Negeb, and in the lowland. And Judah went against the Canaanites. The best way that I know how to describe this is they got it done. They did what they were supposed to do. They went out and they got it done. This is a part of what if we're going to talk about the failure of male leadership in the book of Judges, we're going to see a lot of guys who just either can't or won't get the job done. And the book starts with, here's what it looks like to put your hand to the plow and get the job done. They did it. Now, they did it by working together. They did it by asking God's will. They did it by good leadership. But they got it done. And that's going to be a huge piece for us. Okay. What happens here? And what do you see in verse 19? I'll read it because it's just one thing. And the Lord was with Judah, and he took possession of the hill country. But, I don't remember who it was. Somebody was texting me today, and they said something, and I said, but, ... And they said, no but. And I'm like, I was waiting for the but. The but is never good. They took the hill country, but he could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain because they had chariots of iron. Yeah?
From what I remember you talking about before, that's just a big fat excuse. If they would have had faith in God and put their trust in Him fully, the chariots of iron wouldn't have mattered.
So you think this is a faith problem?
Who decided that they couldn't take them? Because God didn't decide that.
Yeah.
They talked amongst each other and said, I don't want to go against those chariots of iron, do you?
Yeah.
And that,
We can't do that.
you can't do that.
Yeah. They got more ammo than us. They got stronger stuff than us. I remember there's a whole sermon that I did on this, and this is a piece of that. If you just look at some of these, it's based on the Exodus where Pharaoh chased Israel with the chariots, and God messed his wheels up and covered them up with the water and destroyed them. And based upon what happened with the Exodus, in Deuteronomy 3 and Deuteronomy chapter 7, in the verses that you see there, God specifically says, when you see the people of the land and when you see their cities and when you see their size, do not be afraid of them. He told them, don't be afraid, because I'm the one doing the fighting for you. And this ought to sound like familiar stuff, because this is how I think, Joshua 1, 3 through 6. The very first thing that God says to Joshua, that Joshua says to the people, be strong and courageous, do not be afraid, do not fear. And he even mentions the idea of chariots. In Psalm 20 and verse 7 up there behind me right now, this is a thing in the Bible. Some people trust in chariots, some people trust in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord. And Judah, who starts off so strong and so good, says, they have chariots of iron, we can't do that. What do you want to say? I think we've said a lot about that, but I want somebody to say more. Because however bad this book ends, and whatever problems we find at the bottom of this toilet bowl, it all starts with this. This is something worth us paying attention to right now. Ryan?
At the very beginning, starting in about verse 6, you see this one king who was ruling over the land, and because he was taken over, he was humble. He was made low. And that's the same thing that we read like in Mary's song in like Luke chapter 2, is that my son is coming and he's going to take all rulers and all dominion and put them under his feet. And so for Judah to be able to do that right off the bat, they're saying, hey, look at these kings who are ruling over, now they're your servants. Just like how he says, God has repaid me, because he put kings under his feet as well.
Yeah.
We have the evidence at the very beginning of the book that they're able to take over these kings, that they're able to put these evil rulers under their feet. And so there's no excuse for them not to be able to continue that.
Yeah, I can't. It's representative of a lack of faith, and it's the start of decline when we say I can't. Chad?
Just some of the commentary that I read on this it seemed to attribute it to the fact that it was just more equipped for battle. I mean, I didn't get the faith part of the commentary I was reading, and it even referred back to Joshua and how even there it mentioned these
Yeah, was it? Look at Joshua 11. When Jabin, king of, I know you don't have time to turn there. You could turn there if you want. I'm going to read. When Jabin, king of Hazor, heard of this, he sent to Jobab, king of Madon, the king of Shimron, the king of Oxaph, and to the kings who were in the northern hill country, and in the Arabah south of Chinneroth, and in the lowland, and in all of these different places. Verse 4. And they, all of these kings together, they all formed an alliance against podunk Israel. They all came together, out with their troops, a great horde, in number like the sand that is on the seashore, with very many horses and chariots. And all these kings joined their forces and came and encamped together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. And the Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them. For tomorrow at this time I will give over all of them slain to Israel. And you will kill their horses, burn their chariots. And Joshua went out and he did it. And so I would think that this ought to be for us a major red flag when Israel starts off for 18 verses doing everything so victoriously and successfully and obediently. And then they say, they have chariots, I can't do that. We're red flagging all over the place right now. Yeah, Katie?
It also just shows how easily they forgot.
Mm.
And I just read that all throughout Israel's story. Like something victorious will happen, and they just had this great leader who prevailed this whole time. And then you're already 18 verses in Judges, and it's like they've completely forgotten the power of God. And it just, I think about like my life, and I, have these spurts of like true, like I trust in the Lord, I'm so, I'm prevailing in the Lord, and then it's just like how quick we are to just forget what the Lord can do.
Yeah.
Because like you just read, like they weren't scared of chariots, and like earlier, like they weren't scared of the kings, and it's like, how do we forget? Like we are so quick to forget, so.
Yeah, not good. It's not good. Let's keep rolling. You can throw out more, but I want to push the conversation forward here. Verse 20. And Hebron was given to Caleb, as Moses had said, and he drove out from there 3 sons of Anak. But the people of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem. What's the difference between I can't and I won't? What's the difference between could not and did not? Sorry?
Ability and choice. I cannot, it's ability. I will not, it's your choice.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say ability. I know what you're saying, and you're right. You're right. I'm just nitpicking here. Yes, they had the ability with God, but they didn't think they had the ability. And so, yes, that's right. I can't do that. In my world, is light years away from, no, I'm not doing that. The illustration I always use with this one was one of the very first chore that Luke had was taking out the trash. Tiny. He was a tiny little thing when we started him on these chores. He couldn't pull the trash bag out of the trash can, and when he would get the wheels and stuff, he would pull it down and the thing would fall over and the trash would fall over the place. And he's Luke, so he would, panic, and I can't do this. And it's like, hey buddy, we can do this together. I don't expect you to do things that you can't do. We can do this together. I'll help you with the trash. That is 1,000,000 times different from if I say, take the trash out, and he says, no. Those are different. Wildly different. Because one is a lack of faith, I can't do this, and one is outright rebellion. And you see the rebellion throughout this section. This is what they did. The Jebusites have lived with the people of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. Who was it who made the point? Was it you, Ryan, who said they utterly destroyed? Judah started out with utter destruction like they were supposed to. Benjamin didn't do what they were supposed to do, and the Jebusites lived among the people. And there's 3 different things. I think I've got the different verses up there right now. They did not drive out the Jebusites. The Jebusites have lived with the people. And as you continue to read, look at verse 27. Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Bethshean, its villages, or Tanakh, its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, the inhabitants of Iblim. Verse 28, Israel grew strong, but they put the Canaanites to forced labor and did not drive them out completely. I've got something for you to reference here. Yeah, let's just reference it. You can turn over there and look at it if you want. It's Deuteronomy 20 and verses 10 through 17. Deuteronomy 20 verses 10 through 17. What God says is when you're fighting against everybody else in the world, if you defeat them, you can take some of the people and put them to forced labor. But he says, when you're doing this and fighting against the people of the land, like I told you, everybody goes. And Israel says, I'm not going to do some of that. The Jebusites are going to live among us. We're going to take some of the people and we're going to make them forced labor. All of these different verses, look at this theme that persists throughout this whole section as you read through this. What do you turn these into? What do these equate in our life? Like in terms of practical application, all of us know what it looks like to say I can't and to lack faith and to have fear. What are these points to not do outright, to not do what God says? Yeah, Nick?
I think sometimes we have this reaction to sin. We see a problem in our lives and we know we're supposed to drive it out, destroy it completely, but sometimes we let it linger, we let it live among us, and although we think we're doing right, we're not destroying it completely, we're letting it stick around.
Yeah. There's an old preacher thing I heard one time. I've heard lots of people say it, so it's an old thing, you know. We take the old dead man of sin and we bury him under the waters of baptism, but we leave a little string attached to him under the water because every once in a while we want to pull him back up and play with him again. We're not really letting him die. It's integration. What else do you see here? Yeah, Sarah?
It kind of seems like they put themselves in the place of God as far as like determining what's acceptable or not, because it seems like in their mind, like forced labor is like second best option. Like we couldn't drive them out, but they're forced labor, and it just made me think that sometimes it was almost like contagious. Like everyone, they couldn't drive them out, but they were put to forced labor, and it was almost maybe accepted or understood. Like, oh yeah, it's understandable because it's tough or whatever. But I don't know. It's just I don't know.
You say it's understandable. The forced labor is kind of like Achan and the gold. That's going to benefit me. Why would I burn something and destroy something when I could get something out of it? It's understandable. I mean, what you're saying, I think, let's not be Judgy McJudgerton and just point these people into the ground. I can understand exactly why they did what they did.
Perhaps they were comfortable. This land that they were given was a land flowing with milk and honey, right? It was a good land, and now they're in it. So are the Jebusites, but you know what? I can live with them. I'm still comfortable doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
You know, you become complacent. You become distracted. You get comfortable in a spot you shouldn't be in, and then you allow it to live amongst you.
Yeah. What about this? Can you think about a word that represents this? God told me to go into the land and destroy everything in the land, and I'll do some of it. Is there a word for that? Huh? Half-hearted is a good word. I think of compromise. What? Yeah. Yes. Remember how we started at the top with full obedience, and now we have some obedience. Not outright disobedience, but some obedience. Yeah.
I would even go to the extent of saying it's starting out as faithful. God is faithful to His promises. His people are faithful in pursuit, and then they remove themselves from having faith. They become scared or fear or justify themselves and their actions. And like Sarah was saying, in the domino effect of, I mean, you just play it out in your mind of, oh, well, if they're doing that, then maybe I'll put them to forced labor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can see how that benefits them, and how it can benefit us. But God said to drive them out. But it's not that big of a deal, right?
Yeah.
But like you were mentioning, that you were saying was an old saying, it's actually very ancient, I guess, of the Colossians 3 passage, of put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you. And when I think about that, I think, well, what do you do when you put to death something? You murder, you destroy it, you attack it with intentions
Yeah.
to kill it until it is immovable, immobilized or completely disemboweled. I mean, any word that is identifying blood, slaughter, cutting, destruction, that's what we are doing constantly in our walk with the Lord, because we want to be on His side and inherit the land that He's prepared for us, and not let any of the old be a part of it.
Yeah. I keep going back to this. Okay, God, I'll do this, this, and this. I'm not going to do this, this, and this. Morgan, I'll give you this comment, and then I'll move on here. Oh, and then Jonathan, and then we'll move on.
It's a question. I don't know if laziness or complacency or like half-heartedness fully sums it up. Is it also fear driving the bus here? Is that the catalyst
Oh, yeah.
for this failure?
So I'm not going to answer that right now, but what I am going to say is, awesome question. What I'm going to say is, this is only the table of contents. The whole rest of Judges is going to answer that question. Why? What's the problem? Why would they do this thing? Judges is going to paint that picture for us. Jonathan, go ahead.
What strikes me is especially with the forced labor on this, doing what's expedient or doing what works is like a crutch. I think of like, I've heard this sort of explained allegorically, like the Canaanites are sin and the Israelites need to drive sin out. But I think of like, maybe, so you could ask the question, what's the big deal if I cheat on taxes? What's the big deal if I lie at work? Or, exploit, or, just the idea of whatever works.
Yeah.
Being, a stand-in for forced labor.
And isn't it always funny that whatever happens to works is the things that benefits me? It works out that way. Pay attention to this one. Tell me what's going on here. In verse 21, the Jebusites have lived with the people of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. But something subtle happens later on in the chapter. In verse 31, Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Akko, the inhabitants of Sidon, Elab, Akzib, Helba, and Aphek, or of Rehob. So the Asherites lived among the Canaanites. What's different there? What's different between the Jebusites living among the people and the people living among the Canaanites? I see you, Sandy. One other thing, if you just keep on going, you'll see this is the trend now in verse 33. So they, the people of Naphtali, they lived among the Canaanites. This is the new trend. The people don't live among the foreigners. The foreigners don't live among the people live among the foreigners. Sandy?
It's like the Israelites didn't really even stay in control. They said, you're going to be forced labor, you're going to be our slaves. But they didn't even stay in control. They didn't even control that. Because then it kind of flips. They're living among the wicked people, where before it was the wicked people living among the Israelites, but the Israelites were supposedly in control of them.
Yeah.
Keeping them forced labor, keeping them, I don't want to say in their place, but
Yeah, no, that's right.
yeah, knowing that they were wicked. Well, now it's like the wicked people are kind of, well, they're in control of the Israelites.
Yeah. It's like what Dad say whenever we say you live in my house. When you live in my house, you do things by my rules. And I love your word control there. I've got dominance in my Bible. They didn't do what God told them to do earlier, but they were still dominant, had control. Now they didn't do what God told them, and they don't even have dominance. They're in the Canaanites' house. And then finally, I call this integration. Daniel Block has a commentary on Judges, and the main thesis of his commentary for the book of Judges is to say it's about the Canaanization of Israel. Israel is becoming Canaan. And then finally, here's the last thing that you see in verse 34. The Amorites pressed the people of Dan back into the hill country, for they did not allow them to come down to the plain. They have nothing. It's not even about we're living among the people. The people of the land say, get out of here, and they run off with their tail between their legs. And we know from Joshua, and we know from the end of Judges, that Dan doesn't even inherit their territory. They just wander around Israel until they land in a city at the top of Israel where nobody else happens to be. And so it ends in total failure, total defeat. Oops, I thought I had one more slide up there. Sorry about that. I guess this is my last slide. I clicked ahead. Here is your summary. And there's one piece that I would point you to as we end here with this downward spiral. This right here, if you want to know how to fail as a Christian, or if you want to know how to fail as a husband or as a dad or as a congregation, here's your formula. If you're looking for the recipe, there it is. This is how we do it. And I'll just point this to you real quick and then we'll be done. In chapter 2 and verses 1 through 5, do you remember, we talked about this a lot in the book of Joshua. In Exodus 23, God said, I'm going to send the angel of the Lord with you, and he's going to fight for you, and he's going to clear out the people of the land for you. And at the book of Joshua, they crossed the Jordan River, and the angel of the Lord is there, and they said, are you on our team or their team? And the angel says, I'm on God's team. And so long as they're obedient to God, the angel's going to fight with them, fight for them. But in Judges chapter 2 and verses 1 through 5, you see the angel of the Lord, and he says in verse 2, the end of verse 2, what is this you have done? So now I say, I will not drive them out before you. You've got the same angel of the Lord in the same city, and now he says, I'm your enemy. This. Downward spiral. The book of Judges is going to be this. And so we have one more introduction next time in Judges chapter 2 and verse 6 down to chapter 3 and verse 6. We're not going to see military failure. Today we saw military failure. I'm fighting against the people and I'm not fighting and I'm not winning and all of this stuff. Next time what we're going to see is this same thing, but we're going to see it in religious terms. We're going to see religious failure. So come to class ready to have the same conversation, only about religion and not military strength. All right. Thanks for your participation tonight. That was a good class.